Hello everyone, I hope that you have had a wonderful weekend. I wanted to check in and welcome you to the next week of our course, which is going by so quickly, as always. But I just wanted to say a couple of things about your evaluations of the current gifted program that you are, I guess, most connected to, and also introduce our next module on the invisible gifted. Also, I'm recording from home, so if you're wondering where I am, I'm sitting on my floor because when you work all day, sometimes you have to switch it up a little bit. So in terms of these evaluations of your own gifted education programs, I've glanced at a couple of them. I'm recording this Sunday evening, so of course you have some more time, so I haven't had a chance to look at all of them. But one thing that I really wanted to say is that when I first started studying gifted education, I was really discouraged for a while. And I think that it's really important that we do this type of project where we look at how are we actually doing in my current situation? What is the gifted education program looking like? Is it doing what it needs to be doing? And we need to be critical in that. But also, I don't want you to leave that project with a negative, defeated mindset. So just like education, gifted education is a monster, right? There's so much to it, and it's really easy to get discouraged. And for me, when I first started kind of embarking on this journey, it was very difficult for me to know, what do I do? Where do I start? I can't solve all of these problems right now. And I think the most important thing is to encourage a shift in mindset. So we've talked about mindset before in this class, and we'll talk about it a lot in the Invisible Gifted module. But when we think about mindset, not in the sense of growth versus fixed, which is what most people would think of, and that's one educational theory. But what I'm considering mindset is this concept of deficit versus dynamic. And this is very important when we look at cultural change, any kind of research that's based in, we want to make an educational change, an educational perspective change. We'll often use this terminology of a deficit versus a dynamic mindset. So a deficit mindset goes in and only looks for problems and says that student is misbehaving, they must be a problem child. A dynamic mindset goes in and looks for opportunities and says, okay, that child is misbehaving, but what might be the underlying reason? How can I see that behavior as a potential indicator of something good? So a couple of years ago, I was super convicted that I actually had a very deficit mindset of gifted education itself. So I was concerned by all of these problems I was seeing. I wanted to fix them all, and I was neglecting to think about some of the positive things that are going on in gifted ed and some of the opportunities that we have. So in my opinion, the first step and the most important step that we can take in serving gifted children is simply to raise awareness. As you know, there is too much to be done alone, and it is important that you spread the word. That's why I have these assignments like that gifted education flyer, because I want you to take the role of the advocate to be able to start advocating for the needs of these unique children. So it's frustrating when we look at like traditional formal identification procedures and we think, oh my goodness, we're only looking at achievement and aptitude and intellectual ability. What about all of these characteristics we have studied? Yes, it is very frustrating that sometimes some students who are gifted are not formally recognized as gifted and not receiving formal services. But as we have seen, gifted education should be a continuum. So it should start in the regular education classroom. So at least if we are advocating for our students and we are spreading the word, then we're promoting that differentiation within every single classroom. So it brings me a lot of comfort to know that I'm working with, I believe, 26 of you guys in this class this semester, and you each have, or most of you have, your own classroom, And within that classroom, you can differentiate for all learners. And some of them may be formally identified as gifted. Some of them may need that formal identification, but they just don't fit the identification that we're using, which is a problem. But as long as we're spreading this awareness, it is comforting to know that we're bothering other educators and therefore we are implementing change in the individual classrooms. That works in the same manner with administrators, right? So as we spread the word, we gradually implement change. So I just wanted to give you that kind of pep talk to help you see that, yes, there's a lot of issues. Yes, there are big picture legal things that probably need to be done, but also there are things that can be done on Monday morning in the teacher's lounge where you can just tack up that flyer and we can start some conversations, and hopefully we can encourage other educators to at least differentiate within the classroom, at least open their mind to see a quote problem child as actually gifted. That is one thing I think that is super important in terms of understanding gifted gifted characteristics. Like we've talked about in the past, we have what's called universal screening for formal identification at the end of second grade for those achievement and aptitude tests. But that is the only time that students are given the opportunity for universal screening, universal meaning everyone. So every single second grader, no matter what, in South Carolina, will take tests that can be used to formally identify them for gifted education services. It's just during that second grade year. It's the only time it's universal. But what if you have a child in your fourth grade class who you think, I think they're gifted, I think they need some services? Then you, as the teacher, you have the authority and the right to then refer them to be screened. So see if we are changing the mindset of our regular education classroom teachers, then that fourth grade teacher, that fifth grade teacher can recognize these attributes of gifted students and say, ooh, I'm going to refer that child to be screened. He may need some additional services. That's why it's so important that I think we continually study these characteristics, because a gifted child or a child who could potentially need gifted services can be referred anytime through 11th grade. But it takes that teacher to think of them in that mindset and say, I'm going to nominate you to be screened for gifted education services. Another thing that you may not know, if you haven't come across this in the South Carolina manual, is parents can refer their children to be screened. Administrators can refer their children to be screened. In fact, children themselves can self-nominate and say, I think I need to be screened for gifted education services. So I just wanted to highlight that at least in South Carolina, we do have this universal screening in grade 2. But that doesn't mean this is your one chance to be identified as gifted. But the problem is, after grade 2, it takes a referral to then be screened. So that's why it's so important that we're continuing this type of advocacy work, and we're continuing to spread the word of what it means to be gifted, because that way other teachers are able to see these characteristics, and then they are able to nominate the students to be screened for services. Another tool that works pretty well, actually very well, in terms of serving the gifted is what we call local identification. So if you go back to the South Carolina manual, you'll be reminded there's 3 different dimensions that you have to, or 2 of the 3, that you must meet in order to receive those formal gifted education services. So we have aptitude, achievement, and then that intellectual performance, which is Dimension C. Dimension C is where you bring in like your GPA, or elementary school, it's called Project STAR. A and B are more nationally normed, standardized tests. They have to be nationally normed within the last 8 years. So if you go back and look at that, to be identified, you have to be in a certain percentile on a nationally normed test. Well, there are some schools that don't have any students that reach that on the nationally normed test. So they will look at local norms and they'll say, well, compared to students here at this school, these are the students at our school who are in the 98th percentile. So let's provide them with gifted education services. It's been shown to work quite well. However, there's one quite unfortunate caveat. That if you use local identification in South Carolina, you do not receive funding from the state. So if you have 40 plus gifted students or identified students in your district, you receive $15,000 from the state for gifted education services. If, however, you use local identification to identify those students, then you do not get funded. That is an unfortunate caveat. However, it has been shown that using local identification will then create those appropriate environmental contexts to eventually get these students to be identified on nationally normed tests as well. There are other schools. When I was working in Georgia, they had this program called Students of Promise, and it was for those students that were right on the cusp of being identified, which is so frustrating. Those that are just really close, that 97th percentile, but they need the 98th. And with the Students of Promise, they were given very specifically designed differentiated services that would theoretically prepare them to take these tests the next year and hopefully be formally identified. So that's another strategy that I have seen that's quite helpful as well. As we talk about this importance of having a dynamic mindset and the importance of seeing various traits and aptitudes and behaviors as potential indicators of giftedness, that is a really good introduction to our next module. So we will begin this week looking at what I call the invisible gifted, mainly because there's so many students who are, quote, invisible. I like to just give more of a general term to this. But what you will see in the readings and the videos and other materials this week is a very alarming underrepresentation of culturally and linguistically diverse students in gifted ed. It is a huge problem. It is quite obvious. It has always been quite obvious, and it continues to be a problem in gifted education. At NAGC, the National Association for Gifted Children, the conference, I'll actually be there presenting in 2 weeks. There is a whole strand that is geared toward issues of underrepresentation. So it is an issue, but it's also something that the field as a whole is very dedicated to looking into. So in terms of this week, I wanted to just talk briefly about the case study. So this case study is actually based on a personal experience that I had. We were working with a local Title I elementary school, and within the entire elementary school, there were no students identified for gifted programming. So one of my colleagues went and had a conversation with the principal about this, and long story short, the principal said, well, we don't have those kind of students here. We just don't have those here in our school. That is a very common experience in schools that may be struggling. Very bright students are often unrecognized, and they may come from different backgrounds, and therefore they don't look or act like your stereotypical gifted children. So think way back to the beginning of the semester when we looked at that myths and reality. If you look at a general gifted education class, like a pull-out class, chances are most of those students will fit into those myths about gifted education. Most of those students are from higher socioeconomic statuses. Typically, most of those students are white. Most of those students are well-behaved. And most of those students fit what we are now understanding to be myths about gifted education. Students that are not often in formal gifted ed programs are those who may fit more into the realities, especially behavioral issues for sure. So this week I gave you a lot of different readings. One of the most powerful names in terms of underrepresentation in gifted ed is Donna Ford. So Dr. Ford, you'll have the opportunity to watch several different videos from her. Another is Dr. Tarek Grantham. I actually studied with him. He did a lot of mentoring me personally and helping me see my own issues with mindset and my own issues with stereotypes. So I always like to give him a shout out because he has made a great impact on me and my work. Those are two names that I just wanted to make sure you look out for. And another is Mary Fraser. Unfortunately, Mary Fraser is no longer alive, but she created a tool called the tabs. And there's an entire folder in your library dedicated to the tabs. So the tab stands for traits, aptitudes, and behaviors. This is a characteristic checklist that was created to help educators recognize aptitudes or traits or behaviors that could be indicative of giftedness. It is specifically designed to enhance the recognition of traditionally underrepresented students. So I would really encourage you to look at that referral sheet. And if you remember back to when we looked at that characteristic checklist and you had to do a case study of who you thought may be a gifted child, I told you in that video, hey guys, I don't really love this checklist. And I kind of told you to stick a bookmark in that and come back later. So here we are. I don't like that checklist for a lot of reasons, but mainly I don't like it because it's very positively worded. And as we've seen, characteristics of giftedness aren't always going to look super positive. So what makes the tabs really unique is it lists these indicators of giftedness in both a positive and a negative manner. The example I always like to give, and this isn't even positive or negative, it just shows kind of the stereotypes that we place. If you have a child, let's say a first grader, who comes in on the first day of school and says, oh my goodness, I can name all 50 states, and I can name all of their capitals, and I can name all of their states' birds and their state songs, and just starts giving you all of this information about geography. You're going to be super impressed. It's quite likely that, and at least for me, a light bulb would go off and I think, maybe this kid is gifted. Let's kind of keep tabs on him. But imagine that you have a first grader come into your class with headphones in, and they have this journal that's just covered in music lyrics, and you quickly realize that this student knows rap song after rap song after rap song, word for word for word, every single word. Can perform the songs, can write out the lyrics. That is distracting in my classroom. I'm trying to teach. Put that notebook away. That's not what we're covering right now. But if you think about it, those two students are both demonstrating the same aptitude. They are both demonstrating a very impressive, I'd probably call that memory, an impressive memory storage. So I can name all 50 states, but I can recite all the lyrics to this rap song. They're both rooted in a very intense memory, the ability to retain a lot of information, that they're both rooted in some persistence. They're both rooted in curiosity. But you see how one is, oh, well, that's very impressive. You know a lot about geography. And the other is, why do you have your headphones in and you keep listening to music? So that's a really good illustration of the importance of looking at the underlying traits, aptitudes, and behaviors that may be rooted in giftedness, but then recognizing that in different cultural experiences, different environments, those gifts are going to manifest differently. So if you look into the tabs, the metaphor that they give is all of these traits, aptitudes, and behaviors that you'll see, like curiosity and motivation. Those are like the roots of the tree. The roots of the tree. And then the manifestations are like the above ground, the trunk and the branches and the leaves of the tree. And so we can't always look at the roots, but we can look at the above ground behaviors. So I would really encourage you to look at that tabs checklist and maybe even go back and look at that other checklist we saw and think about, man, look at the difference between these checklists. Look how this checklist itself could even encourage some kind of bias recognition. So that is your challenge for the week. As always, I'm looking for your initial discussion post by Friday and then your responses to the post by Sunday. The discussion this week is based on a difficult situation, a difficult comment that I've heard many times, just saying, oh, well, we don't have gifted students here. I can almost guarantee you that you will come across that problem at some point in your career. So I'd encourage you to really dig deeply into the library materials and consider how you would respond. I did want to make one other announcement. I have fallen a little behind in grading. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I'm teaching 5 classes and I've been out in the field, so I realize I'm a little bit behind. You should have graded up until the gifted education flyer. So I'm currently working on your previous discussion posts and digging into those critiques of the gifted education program. But make sure that you do have a grade for everything up to that flyer. And know that I'm working hard to get caught up, and I apologize for being a little bit behind. As always, I'm here to field any questions. I'd love to hear your comments. And I'm really looking forward to looking over those critiques that you posted. It's always encouraging for me to see you looking critically at your own gifted program, and I learned a lot from that as well. So I hope that you guys have a wonderful week. Unfortunately, the cat never made an appearance. Let's see if I can scan over to her. Where is she at? There she is. Being pretty lazy. All right. I'm here if you guys have any questions, and I hope that you have a wonderful week.